Today's episode is brought to you by 9centprinting.com. With over 100 five-star reviews, 9centprinting.com is ready to meet all your printing needs. Are you a church plant or small church with no copy machine? No problem. 9cent Printing has you covered. If you need bulletins, flyers, books, cards, offering envelopes, posters, they do it all. I know the Christian owners of this business personally, and I'm not just a fan, I'm also a customer. Fast, nationwide shipping, affordable, professional, wow printing at wow prices. Check them out at 9centprinting.com. All right, welcome to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. This podcast is a ministry Small Town Network. We exist to make disciples, train pastors, and plant churches in smaller communities. Today we're joined by two new friends that I met recently at an Evergreen Network event, Jeff Bennett and Craig Whitney. Welcome to the podcast, guys. How are you doing?
Good. Great to be here.
Awesome.
Great, Eric. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, great to have you on. Most of the time we just have like local small town, nobody's like me, but now we have authors of books and leaders of ministries. And so it's like very exciting.
Yeah, we're still local small town nobodies.
Yeah, good to have you guys on. You guys represent a ministry called, is it Multiplyproject? Is that?
Yes.
Not
yes.
the
Everybody always wants to say the.
Yeah, I caught
project.
myself going.
Yes.
Okay.
But officially there's the is not there. It's just
okay.
We'll answer to anything, but
okay.
that is it.
Right on. Well, hey, why don't you guys just take it away? Tell us about Multiplyproject, kind of how you got started and why, why your organization exists, what you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Jeff and I have both been in church planting for decades. We're OGs, right? I planted in 1991, which just is, 35 years ago, the world was a very different place. Church planting was a very different thing. But really got hooked on just the fruit of church planting, probably more than anything. Like probably a lot of people, my dad had been a pastor, felt called into ministry in high school, had been trained in high school how to make disciples. So I sort of had this maybe unique mindset that, we actually ought to be able to introduce people to Jesus and see their lives transformed, not just show up on Sunday and preach sermons. And had worked in a couple of churches, out of Bible college, and just so many frustrations that you experience in sort of very small traditional churches. So planted a church and began to see the kinds of things that we expected to see, introducing people to Jesus, seeing people's lives transform, people, leaving addictions, marriages getting put back together, those kinds of things. And so that sort of experience just in and of itself was, all right, this is why we plant churches, is to see that kind of transformation happen in people's lives. I eventually transitioned into helping other people plant churches. I've been doing that now for close to 20 years. I really am the old guy. Jeff and I spent a decade working together in an organization called Stadia. And even in the tenure of time that we were there, I think we saw a pretty significant transformation. When I started there, it seemed like every person, every ministry-minded person that was 30 years old wanted to plant a church. I spent a lot of time developing assessment, those kinds of, because it was like, man, we had to figure out which of these people actually could and should do this.
Yeah.
But it's like you fast forward to now, and it's like, we're shaking every tree trying to find a single church planter. And it's just not easy that it's no longer true that every single person in ministry wants to plant a church.
Well, that's the case, man. That's for real. Yeah.
The other thing, unfortunately, I would say that we saw was, and maybe these things go together, really that's sort of the quality, for lack of a better way of saying it, of the people who were raising their hand was not the same that it had been. We would remember going to assessment and meeting people and thinking, wow, these are awesome people. They're going to plant a great church. And we'd start going to assessments and look around the room and go, oh, is this is gonna be a long week kind of, thing. And so what we began to realize in looking at the landscape was, we built all these tools and systems and resources for helping people plant churches. But there wasn't really a whole lot in place for making church planters. And I know that's sort of a weird way to say it.
That's great.
But I think your audience probably understands what I mean when I say that, right? How do we help someone become the kind of person that can and will plant a church and do that effectively and do that faithfully? That doesn't happen. It can happen by accident. I could sort of look at my own life experience, and Jeff maybe tell a little bit of his story and argue, some of that was by accident. God in providence put us in certain kinds of places with certain kinds of people. That we got the right kinds of experiences that I think prepared us for that. But I think there's a difference. Hope is not a plan.
Hope is not a plan.
And so we see a lot of people sit around hoping a church planter is going to show up and like, yeah, but maybe we could actually do something intentional and make them. And so the mission of Multiply Project is to help churches call, equip, and send church planters. And so we want to come alongside the local church, give them tools, resources, guidance, coaching, community, the things that they really need to be able to effectively develop church planters from the people that are already within their church. And we sort of operate under this conviction that if you are a healthy church, and we recognize that is a caveat, but if you are a healthy church, there's a potential church planter in your church. And I know that this is sort of small town network means smaller churches, and it's really easy for people like, oh yeah, that's true in the big mega church, and if you got 60 people, there's a church planter in your church.
Yeah.
Right. If you're a mega church, you got 6,000 people, there's 100 church planters in your church. So it might be easier to find one. But I don't think that, it's not such a needle in a haystack that, it takes 1,000 people to find one potential church planter.
Well, it's also, so like, you work for Stadia. I was probably one of the, last few assessments of NCEA.
Yes.
Before it became Stadia for my first church plant. And so I know Roger Gibson and Phil Claycomb and all those guys.
Yes. So for all of the stuff that we have in common, Eric, I planted with NCEA.
Yeah.
So I would have been I don't know what number you would have been, somewhere, I don't know, in the 40ish, probably number of plants. I would have been in like the first 15.
Okay. Well, we planted with OCF in Oregon, but
but you went to an NCEA
everybody
setting.
used their assessment because what I think happened, and this is kind of my take on what I experienced in the early 2000s, is that the buzz in the Northwest and in other church planting circles was there's this group in California that have figured something out. And they're starting all these churches, and they're using business professionals and all these people that haven't been to Bible college, and they seem to have this formula. It's like plug and play, man. Get a good Christian dude that looks like this and passes this test, this assessment, and then plug them in and to these growing communities in California, and everybody wanted to go down and copy, what they were doing. And I mean, that's literally what they were doing. The church groups in Oregon and Washington, everybody's just wanting to copy what California group is doing because they have unlocked the code, and of course, if you get a couple of them that go big, then it's really exciting. And it's like, hey, we're going to plant big churches too. And of course, bigger is better. And so we got this whole formula. But like you alluded to, it seems like now something's changed, and that's not been that long ago.
No.
It's been 20, 25 years ago. This was the thing to do. I mean, I think that's what led NCEA to go national and become Stadia, to take this formula to the world, and 25 years later, you're saying, and I'm feeling like it's changed. You guys, what's changed?
I think there are, there's just so many factors. So I think, culturally, we have to recognize that, there's been significant shifts. Any of the stuff you would read about the rise of the nuns, there's some evidence right now that maybe there's some reversal of that trend, but we've been in a 20-30 year trend of people just more and more moving away from any identity of faith in their life. And so I think there was an era probably around the time that we planned in the 90s, that it was sort of get an school auditorium, find somebody that can play the guitar and sing, someone can speak halfway decent, make sure there's coffee and things for kids, and you'll get a church. Now, I don't know in the small towns you're in. I don't live in a huge, I don't live in the Bay Area. I grew up there. I live in Sacramento, but still, it's a large city.
Yeah.
I promise you that does not work here.
Okay.
It just doesn't. Because, in the neighborhood that I live in, there is no one who has a pent-up energy to say, maybe we should just show up at church on Sunday. Uh, they will completely ignore that. And so church planting, I think, has become missionary work as opposed to launching a service work. That's made it more challenging. And I think that's become pretty universal across the country now, where it may have been true in California much longer. I think there is a dynamic of what has shifted demographically in the church, where when I in the 90s as a 20 something, I'm working for a lead pastor who's 10 years older than I am. How long am I going to work for him before I get a chance to be a lead pastor?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep.
Right? Decades. Now, I mean, it's all guys like us that are finally retiring, and every church in the world's trying to figure out who's our next pastor. And so if you're a 20-something, especially, if you're hitting 30 and you can preach,
Yep.
there's probably a church of hundreds of people that will hire you as their lead pastor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so maybe a church of thousands.
With that being said, so we're I'm a West Coast guy basically my whole life in Oregon, in the last 6 years in Idaho. You're a West Coast guy, but Jeff,
Yep.
you live in the South, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So that's an interesting, contextual shift there. So West Coast is very like, liberal, kind of progressive, secular society. I know Atlanta is not exactly like a bastion of conservatism or
Right.
whatever, but as you think about like the Bible Belt, is what Craig's talking about on the West Coast the same in the South? Is it the same or is it different or?
I think there's a lot in common, honestly. And part of it may be because I am in a larger city. But I would say there's a couple other challenges too. Craig, you kind of talked to the external
Mhm.
challenge. I think there's an internal challenge that Craig and I have found, which is why we started Multiply Project. I would say my last several years at Stadia, there was barely a week that would go by that I didn't have a pastor come up to me and go, or on a call like this, go, "Hey, Jeff, where are future church planners at?" And again, you go back to 90s, early 2000s, I think there was a lot of guys raising their hand. They didn't have some of the opportunities that they do now that Craig just spoke to. And so it's like, hey, if I'm going to lead something, I'm going to plant church. But I was getting weekly, multiple times, hey, where are future church planners? And my answer to that would be, I know exactly where they are. They're in your church.
Yeah.
And the skepticism that I got in return, regularly, I don't think I have a church planner in my church. And what we realized is that most pastors were thinking through a lens of readiness. They were thinking of the latest church planner that they knew, and they're thinking of their congregation and going, I don't have that person in my church. And that's where we talk about potential over readiness. Like, no, you do have that person in your church. They're just not ready yet. Who do you see potential in? And that was my story. I mean, Craig shared his story. I grew up in a church that never got larger than 500, was typically in the 250, 300 range as far as congregation size. But man, they had a church planning heartbeat. And so we were always part of church planning. But beyond that, the congregation, the leaders, the adults in the congregation, like just even for me growing up there, they saw potential in me, and not just in me, but in everybody in the youth group, and spoke into that potential and developed that potential. But then what else happened is they saw potential in the marketplace leaders sitting in our congregation. And we had several marketplace leaders step out of that and go start churches, lead churches, become missionaries. It was a mindset that I think is just lacking. I think over the last, 30 years, we have become really good in the American church at outsourcing. We outsource everything, including
I was
staffing.
I was literally just sitting here thinking about that word because I was at a Bible college meeting where a lot of pastors were invited to speak at a Bible college, and like with representatives from a Bible college to kind of brainstorm, what the colleges can do to try to help come beside churches and help them train up people, et cetera, et cetera. Um, And it was really weird because what kept happening is people, like pastors in the room, I kept noticing these themes. One is like, we can't find anybody to come work at our church, right? Another one is like, um, the people, like, well, if anybody said anything about like insourcing, like raising up people from within, it's like, well, they don't have a Bible college degree, you know, and then it's like, they're the Bible college is like, well, we don't have any students to come to our college. And I was so frustrated by that. And I kind of uncharacteristically kept my mouth shut till like the very end and finally just said, you guys, the problem with what we're all talking about here is we're all talking about a system that relies on outsourcing, and not just outsourcing for personnel, but outsourcing our responsibility, right? We have a responsibility to raise people up to maturity from within. Church planning, we all know, is never commanded in scripture, but it keeps happening. So what explains that? Jesus never said to do it. The apostles never said to do it. And yet we keep seeing these new churches popping up. How did this happen? Well, it's the overflow of disciple making, which is really just the fulfillment of the Great Commission, right? So
Yep.
we're all trying to like,
Yeah.
we're kind of bemoaning that this thing that we're doing isn't working, but it's not the thing we've been supposed to be doing in the first place. So in a weird way, I feel like the shift that we're all experiencing in the decline of summer camps, which are like the gateway drug to Bible college, and decline of, Bible colleges, and decline of students who want to go and all that stuff, it might be a unique opportunity in the history of the church to kind of rethink and rewrite, how we think about it. And so to your point, Jeff, your church had that on its mind. It was thinking that way. As you guys travel and present your information and stuff, do you feel like most churches that you encounter aren't thinking this way? It's uncommon for churches to think about being a reproducing church.
Uh, yeah, I don't
It's
know
an
which, but
interesting question.
it is.
Interesting way to answer that.
Yeah,
I'll let you go
I
first.
think the thing that we see and that we would say is there's probably more multiplication language in the church today than we've ever experienced, in our lifetimes. I can take some credit of having quite a bit of lifetime. Like
Great.
I don't remember, as a young, certainly young pastor, young man, I don't remember anyone ever saying the word multiplication. Like
Yeah, sure.
it just wasn't even part of the language.
Yeah.
And I might argue almost in some ways that maybe that's actually part of the problem, and maybe we should have thought about a different name, because I think the thing that the churches Jeff and I grew up in, wasn't multiplication, it was send.
Yeah.
And I think that is what people are afraid of, and
What
what
do
they're
you, what do you
reticent
mean?
to do. Well, sending inherently means people leaving.
Losing.
Yeah.
Right. I write a email once a week called the Multiply Minute, and the one that went out just this week was the subject was sending isn't shrinking. And so it's like that maybe you need to tell your people that sending isn't shrinking. And the idea is just that, sending is exactly what you just said, Eric. Sending is the overflow of the fact that we are making disciples, that we're reproducing disciples. And if that's happening, then our church is going to send. That's a good thing. And we ought to see it as the overflow, not as some loss. And so what we find is that there's a lot of conversation about multiplication, but not a lot of multiplication actually happening.
Okay, that's I think a great distinction and really important. I just read an article recently from renew.org that was titled, it was not a catchy title, but it was something like, if you're not making disciples, you should stop saying that you are, or something like that. It was very funny. Because I think what's happened is when things get trendy, everyone talks about it.
Correct.
So it's really
Totally.
easy for a church to get up and say, like literally nothing has changed from them being like, let's say, just an attractional or traditional church, but now they've adopted this discipleship language and like, we're making disciples. It's like, how? Like, in what way is that true? And if you say we're going to be a multiplying church, our church plant, we started High Plains here in Twin Falls. We're like, hey, the goal of this is going to be a reproducing church. And I've coached planters and been on planting boards and planted myself and heard, had all the new planters come in and give the pitch to the congregation. And every one of them would say, we're going to be a church that plants churches. And then none of them do it, right? And
Right.
so at 45, I'm like, I'm going to go plant this church in Idaho, and I want to figure out how to actually do it. And what we realized, from that like goal and then working backwards, planning backwards, like reverse engineering, we realized we were just going to have to draw it up differently. Is like we can't do it the way we always do it and expect the different result. We're going to have to. So that led us to things like, bivocational and
Mhm.
yeah, residence and me only preaching half the time and stuff like that. Like just started baking that into like how we do what we do. And I think that a lot of churches their heart is right. They've caught that vision of like, man, wouldn't it be great for us to reproduce, but they're not doing it. And
Yeah.
so in your guys' minds, what are some of the barriers that are preventing people from good intentioned people from not really seeing that happen in their churches? What are the barriers?
Yeah, we've started using this language, and you just said it. The biggest barrier are the good things they're doing.
Oh man.
Yep.
Like give us some
So
examples so people can understand like really what that means.
So, Jeff you came to our 5 shifts workshop, and Jeff tells a story in the beginning of, being what, 50 pounds overweight,
Yeah,
Jeff,
exactly.
drinking 3 sodas a day. And so it's like, man, how do I get healthy from here? Well, I could stop drinking all of those sodas, right? So when you're in a position where you're doing bad things, doing unhealthy things, and someone paints a picture of transformation away from those unhealthy things, like, oh yeah, we should leave those unhealthy things behind and pursue something better. But when you're doing good things, and that's the problem in many of those
Yeah.
churches, right?
Yeah,
They've got all these programs and all these things that they do, and the reality is they're good. Now, I know that's not true in every church, but
sure.
let's give churches,
By and large.
some by
Yeah.
and large, some
Yep.
credit,
Yep.
some kudos for really, having good hearts, faithful, desiring to serve the Lord. And as a result of that, there are good things going on. And so moving from addition to multiplication is not a move from something that's bad to something that's good or something that's wrong to something that's right. It's moving from something that's good to
Better.
something that's better.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Such an
hard.
important
Yep.
distinction.
Yep.
So good can be the enemy of the better, right? So in
Yeah.
a Great Commission kind of mindset, the good things that many churches are spending their time and energy doing could actually be taken away from the better thing, which is seeing the kingdom advance and et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's why we developed the 5 shifts workshop that you came to, Eric, was realize that we needed a way to help churches sort of think about this, maybe sort of operationalize this in a way. Also, we sort of saw that people would go to workshops about multiplication and they sort of come back with ideas that suggested you just needed, to just abandon everything your church was doing. And again, when it's good
Turn it down.
stuff,
Yeah.
Here's 30 new things you need to
Yeah.
be doing. What pastor?
uh,
You just ended the conversation.
yeah,
Yeah. Because like
um,
even if he wants to do it, his board's going to tell him no.
Yeah, it's like I can't do
yes,
that. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
I I think another because I mean I think that's the key. If it was just all bad habits that churches had, that'd be a lot easier. You get convicted, these are bad habits, these are bad things we're doing, we need to do good. But no, it's good things churches are doing. And
Yeah.
so it's like how do you start to build in the margin and time and the shifts to do better things?
Right.
I think another obstacle challenge is there's a lot of different ways for a church to jump into multiplication and church planting.
Mm.
And it's another good thing. But one of those is you can have a multiplication mindset. Go, we're gonna help fund church planters that we know. And I think all of us would agree that's a great thing. Like they need funding, right? Like let's help them out. But it's also the easiest thing to do. And so if I'm leading a
Yeah.
church, we can stroke some checks and you know what? We're multiplying. And again, good thing, it's helpful, but it's not moving the needle for the church in America. It's
It's
not
outsourcing
helping
again. It's
develop.
outsourcing. Yeah. I'm just going to
Yeah,
send
it's
yeah,
not
money to someone else who will go do it.
exactly. You're
Yeah.
not taking the ownership of going, oh, but are we going to help identify and develop the next
Yeah.
church planter we send.
Yeah.
Those are different multiplication activities
Yeah.
that most churches aren't doing.
Yeah.
Well, so like you know, you remember like I know back in the day you guys have heard this thing. Remember when they used to do the math on like if there was one Christian and he made one disciple in 1 year, and then you know he reached the whole world, which never factors in that like some people don't want Jesus. But anyways, um, you know, that kind of idea is not that radical to think like if every pastor would say, I'm going to raise up one pastor in my lifetime, that's a pretty small goal, right? If your average pastor starts at a pulpit at age 30, and it's going to work till they're 70 because they have no retirement, you know, that's 40 years to make one other pastor. If every church could like have the vision of just planting one daughter church, if every
Yeah.
disciple could have that idea of like making one disciple, it's not that hard, right? But it's we're not, like you guys have alluded to, we're not built to do it. It's not how we've been
Right.
programmed. It's
Right.
not how we've been
Yeah.
trained.
Yeah.
Like the table full of like, you know, trained theologians at the Bible college all going like, we can't find good pastors to hire. And I'm like, are you guys for real? Like you're
Yeah.
trying to be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Well, I
know,
do think that is in itself, I would argue, maybe one of the barriers as well, is sort of the assumption that
Yeah.
biblical theological education is a mandatory
mandatory.
requirement for anyone who would, lead a church or,
Yeah.
become a church planter, any of those things. And I want to be really careful here. Biblical knowledge, theological orthodoxy are important. So don't someone say, "Well, we'll argue it." Right? I would have said, but I would say, first of all, character matters more.
Absolutely.
So at the top or the bottom, whichever one, like character formation is the first thing, not biblical theological knowledge.
Yeah.
And so without that, we have real problems. But then it's sort of the how much biblical and theological education, training, knowledge is necessary to effectively plant a church. This is decades ago. A friend invited me to dinner with a missionary that was in town, and they had been working in Southeast Asia. And he told this story about how one of their missionaries had gone into a village, brought the scripture for the very first time. Probably the Gospel of John was all they had, and led a dozen people to faith in Jesus. And then they'd come back like 6 months later to see how the new Christians were doing. And one of the people in the tribe was excited to tell them that he had gone to a neighboring tribe and told them about Jesus. And there was now a dozen Christians over there. Neither one of them had any written scripture.
Yeah.
Like, so how do we view that, right? And most of us would look at that in a missionary context and go, oh, that's awesome. But then we back that into our American context and kind of have this, how dare you? That's so wrong.
We're going to say the wrong thing. What could happen?
Yeah.
And not only, Craig, how much education do you need, but how do you receive it? I mean, do you have to go away to a seminary for 3 years?
And so there's just a lot of rethinking that I think needs to happen there. I remember very early on, and kind of caveat for someone who will now not read my book, I never went to seminary. Part of it was I went to a 4-year Bible college, as my undergrad, in a system where you do your undergrad in some other subject, then go to seminary. I think I have a better understanding of seminary, but I got that biblical foundation, took Greek, did, all the theology classes. I got out, I was like, I'll go to seminary. And I'm looking around at the people around me. I go, these people are not struggling to be effective in leadership and ministry because they don't know enough theology.
Yeah, that's not the problem.
They don't know how to lead. They don't know how to strategize. They don't. I got a pastor that doesn't know how to read the financial report. Like, what? And so I actually went off and enrolled in an MBA program rather than a seminary program, because I was like, man, I need to know how to lead. I need to know how to run an organization. Like, these are the reasons that people are struggling. They have nothing to do with their lack of theological understanding. So I may just have a really different perspective on that. But I do think that if we can step away from sort of that bias and think about like, what are the characteristics? We have a scouting guide that we've developed, just 10 qualities of people to look for in your church that are evidence of potential. And again, we're not saying they're ready. It's not,
Right.
it's just, if you see somebody do this, pay attention. They might be a potential church planter. It's the sort of the sport equivalent, right? When you see a person walk through the room that's 6'4", we all think, oh, there's a basketball player. People who are into sports, we'll see certain, you see any kid, run, just like, and everyone is behind them. Like, yeah, let's get this kid on the soccer field, or like, we just sort of have these characteristics we assume lead to other things.
Yeah.
Well, when you see people, one of the big ones, when you see people in your church who have a tribe, it's the term that we use, outside the church, of people that they spend their time with, that are their people, and that they have an expressed desire to lead those people to Jesus, I think that's called a missionary.
Yeah.
Right? But we don't look at it that way. We may actually be trying to get them to, not hang out with the motorcycle club, or, not spend so much time with all the soccer families because they should be at church, instead of realizing, no, maybe what we actually have on our hands is a missionary, a person who cares deeply about a group of people and has invested their lives in them. And that kind of characteristic is, just to be bluntly honest, far more important for a potential church planter than whether they know how to exegete Romans 8. It's just...
I'll tell you what, I'll share this and we'll kind of wrap this episode. We'll start at the next one. But I got to do a bunch of international church planning, kind of house church multiplication stuff with E3 partners. Years ago. I started with a guy named Mike Wagner from Alabama, and in Rwanda. And he would always tell us, the workers are in the harvest fields. The people that we're praying for God to raise up, workers, they're the ones that we're reaching, and then they turn around and become the workers, the co-laborers. And I think a way that I kind of think about it is, if the workers are in the harvest fields, the pastors are in the pews. The problem is they don't see themselves that way, and we don't see them that way.
Right.
Because of our preconceived notions about what pastors are and who pastors are and how educated pastors are, we look at the men in our churches and say, if you want to zoom out and say, for leadership, men and women in our churches, and they're not qualified. There's no one out there that's qualified, and they go like, well, we're not qualified. And it's such a like a sad, like almost deception that's happened, that's been perpetrated on the church, that we don't have eyes to see the future leaders that are right there in our buildings. They don't see it, we don't see it, and yet it's right there laid out for us in the Word. So we'll hit a pause there. I want to encourage everyone to check out multiplyproject.org. And the book, The Antioch Way, which has been a fantastic read. I'll confess I'm not done yet, but I'm going to plow through. I really like it. And I want to thank these guys for being on today. Be sure and check out our sponsors at 9centprinting.com. We actually have sponsors, you guys. Isn't that cool? If you like what we're doing,
better than we are.
Yeah. If you like what we're doing, please like or subscribe wherever you watch or listen. If you're interested in Small Town Network, you can find us online at smalltownnetwork.com. You've been listening to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by 9centprinting.com. With over 100 5-star reviews, 9centprinting.com is ready to meet all your printing needs. Are you a church plant or small church with no copy machine? No problem. 9 Cent Printing has you covered. If you need bulletins, flyers, books, cards, offering envelopes, posters, they do it all. I know the Christian owners of this business personally, and I'm not just a fan, I'm also a customer. Fast, nationwide shipping, affordable, professional, wow printing at wow prices. Check them out at 9centprinting.com.